In 2003, I was a gymnast at Rutgers University. I got a phone call from my dad. He said, "Lauren, your mom died. Get on the next plane you can and I'll be at the airport to pick you up." He never did show up. Instead, it was my Uncle Mike who had to tell me, "Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too." And that was the day that changed my life forever. So I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, and what you would kind of consider a quiet suburban middle-class family. And it was me, and it was my older brother Alan, and my mom and dad. And we were a happy family. We were the type of family always on the go.
My name's Alan Sisler, and I'm Lauren's older brother. You know, I remember Mom and Dad always being very involved in everything we did as kids. Being, you know, Dad always being an assistant coach on all my sports teams growing up and so forth.
We had a lot of family get-togethers. My parents lived in town. We spent all holidays together.
You know, I remember, you know, Mom and Dad were, you know, always very easygoing, you know, very open with us, you know, to allow us to kind of run around, do what we, you know, wanted to, as long as we kept our noses clean and didn't get into any trouble.
We were always either at her house or at our house because our children were all real close.
You know, so growing up with my mom and my dad and my brother, I always thought I had this perfect family. You know, the invincibility factor. I felt, you know, we had a great family. We were a strong, loving family. Both of my parents were together. I was very fortunate that neither one of my parents, they hadn't separated. And ultimately, I just felt like there was so much love that was in that house. And I just never could imagine that something so tragic could happen to two people that could love so well and that were loved by so many.
They were there for her every day, which would drive her in long, you know, an hour drive to get here for our morning practices and then go to work. And Lauren and her parents were extremely close, and it meant the world to her to have them support her the way they did.
My parents came to visit me for the first time at Rutgers. It was my second semester and it was in February, and they came to see me compete in my first gymnastics meet as a collegiate gymnast. And so I went out there, and I remember you know, just being really excited to have them there visiting and sort of watching me live out my dreams. And I go out there and compete this floor routine, and it was as if I had scored a perfect 10. They were so elated and just jumped out of their seats, just cheering. And I think what's so hard is I see them then, I see this vision of them then, when they came to visit me for the very last time, the last time that I would ever see them living, and just had no idea that they had this pain and this addiction that just had such a strong grip on them. And I think that's what's so hard, is because it was almost like there was this shield, and they had put up this shield to try to protect me, to try to protect my brother and our family, and really to protect themselves from what was going on under the surface.
I had no clue whatsoever or suspicion that they were, you know, misusing the drugs that they were prescribed. I truly didn't. I knew they'd been seeing a pain management specialist. I knew Dad had a lot of the lower back issues and surgeries over the years. I knew Mom had a degenerative disc disease and had a lot of issues and multiple surgeries, and I knew she was dealing with a lot of pain. And, you know, for me, I just, you know, because they always seemed fine and normal to me for the most part. You know, they were always seemed, you know, alive and well, you know, mobile, getting around, not acting like, you know, anything was really odd or off whenever I was around, you know, when I'd come in on the weekends. And that's why I was shocked that once the toxicology reports did come back, that they had actually, passed away from drug overdoses,
And I think that was the hardest part, is not realizing that they had this addiction and that it was consuming them every single day. And of course, I'm at college. My brother's in the Navy, so he's 3 or 4 hours from home. And so we're not living in the house with them at this point. But, this was a progression. This was not something that just started like that. This was something that was happening over the course of several years.
Well, I remember it, almost like it's yesterday. In reality, March 23rd, I was actually that evening from 15:30, which would be 3:30 p.m. until 11:30 that night. I was actually staying in officer of the deck watch at the command I was stationed at in Naval Station Norfolk. Finished out my watch as the officer of the deck there at the command. And I remember getting off at 11:30, going home. Probably got home, got in bed probably around 1:30. And I remember getting a call from Lauren between 3 and 3:30, and I could definitely tell, she was upset by the sound of her voice.
I was scheduled to work that night at Roanoke Memorial Hospital in the emergency room, and about 10 o'clock I got a call, and the call was from Butch, and he had told me that Leslie had died from an overdose.
I remember setting my alarm clock and getting in the bed, and I fell asleep. And next thing you know, I wake up to the phone ringing. And I look at the clock, and it's the middle of the night, and I'm thinking, oh boy, this isn't good. Who could be calling me? And I look at the caller ID, and it says home. So of course, my emotions, my heart's racing, my heart's beating, and I answer the phone, and my dad is on the other end, and I said, hello? And he says, Lauren, I need to talk to your brother. And you could just hear it in his voice, and he was shaking. And he said, I couldn't get in touch with your brother. I need you to call your brother. And I said, well, Dad, what is wrong? And he said, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your mom's passed away. And I said, what? What do you mean, Dad? I don't understand. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, how in the world can this happen? I said, Dad, what happened? And he said, Lauren, I can't explain it right now, but I need you to get on the next flight. You can, and I will be at the airport to pick you up.
Alan, Mom's dead. And I was like, huh? I was shocked. I was blown away. I was like, Mom's 45. How is she dead? How, it's 3:30 in the morning. What's going on?
Leslie's dead. I was like, what? Are you, from that moment on, it was like people were talking to me, and I really wasn't hearing what they were saying.
At that point, I was worried about Dad, just due to the fact, he's in Giles alone by himself. What's going on? Everything's still fuzzy and cloudy about what exactly happened with Mom. And I remember calling, leaving voicemails, and couldn't hear back from him.
And so when that plane touched down, I get off the plane, I go sprinting through the terminal, I walk outside, and it's like a ghost town. This is a very small airport, and nobody's there to pick me up. And I'm just looking around. There's not a single soul out there. And I'm thinking, okay, take a deep breath. He's going to be here soon. And so I just figured my dad was on his way from the house to come pick me up. And I waited, and then my Uncle Mike and my cousin Justin pulled up to pick me up. And I remember they get out of the car, and we hug each other, and we're all crying, and really everyone's at a loss for words. And nobody knew what to say. And so at this point, we get in the car and we start driving, and I'm thinking, all right, well, we're going to go home, and my dad's probably still taking care of things. We're going to see him soon. And we start driving out of the airport. He pulls out. My Uncle Mike is driving the car. He pulls off the exit. And at this point, still nobody has said anything about what had happened to my mom and where my dad was. And so finally I just worked up the courage and said, Uncle Mike, I said, where's my dad at? And it's crazy because I can still feel the gravel up underneath the car. As he pulled that car over, he puts the car in park, and he turns around and he says, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad's passed away too.
So she came in thinking only her mother had died, only to find out it was her mother and dad both.
Lauren was waiting for me at my mom and dad's house, and it's like I saw a little girl that had everything taken away from her. And she wanted me to tell her that it was going to be okay, that it wasn't really this bad, but it was bad.
I just remember just being so confused about like how these two people could just be gone. Like, they're gone. I lived my whole life with these two people. And just to know that I would never feel their embrace again. To know that, you know, I'll never pick up the phone and I'll never hear them tell me they love me and how proud they are of me. And I think that is the hardest part, is knowing that both of my parents aren't here to see me grow up.
My dad never got over losing her. He didn't understand why she didn't come to him, that he would have given her everything that he had. And I found out later that he was helping them make mortgage payments. And he thought he was helping them. And the mortgage payments weren't being made. And to tell him that he wasn't really helping them, that he was enabling, was probably the most difficult thing I ever had to do in my life.
We start putting the plans in motion for the funeral. And that probably was the hardest thing I had to do, was because I had to sit down with my brother and my aunt and discuss how we were going to bury my parents. And going out to pick their caskets, and like, you're not even just picking one, but you're picking two. And they both were cremated, and so we had to pick their caskets, and then we had to pick the urns out. You know, and that'll be $9,000. Like, okay, you know, like, I don't, you know, you don't prepare yourself for these things. You know that life happens and that one day you're going to go through these things, but you never can prepare for it. And I remember being in that funeral home and walking into the viewing area for the first time. And it was before everybody had gotten there, before the funeral. And I remember walking in that room and walking over to both of the caskets at the front of the room and looking in that casket and seeing my parents' face. And they were so sad. They were sad. Just to think that's how they left this earth. The emotions were all across the spectrum, because obviously the initial shock of what happened, and then you go through the grief of the loss, and that grief lasts forever. I mean, we're almost 16 years later. That grief is still deep within me, and it comes to the surface all the time. And it's that grief of the what ifs. What could have I done differently? What if I would have known? Maybe my parents would still be here. And you go through those stages, but anger definitely ran through me quite a bit. especially when I went back to school and knew that I had to pick up and keep living. And it was that anger of like, why did you leave us? Mom and Dad, why did you leave us? Why did you leave me here to figure this out on my own? This was not supposed to happen. And I think that to me was the hardest part, because they were the two people I loved the most, and yet I'm so angry. They're not even here to talk to me and tell me what happened, and I'm so angry with them. And I think that's where all the unknowns really made it difficult, because we didn't know. Did they overdose intentionally? Did they want to take their own lives? Were they trying to commit suicide? Was this just a product of their addiction? There were so many questions racing through me. And I think the hardest part was painting a picture that I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be different. I didn't want it to be drug overdoses. I didn't want it to be addiction, because I felt so many people judge you for that. And there's so much shame that is attached to addiction that I wanted their story and their ending to be different. It was as I started to build on this truth and build on this understanding of how my parents died, I started to become a little bit more comfortable with sharing their story. And so it would start with, my best friend, my former coach, my coworker, and then I started getting more and more comfortable in groups of people. And then that group got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And now when I stand up in front of a group of people and share my story and share my parents' story, I feel like they're standing there next to me, because I feel that they've given me their blessing to say, you know what, this happened to us. Let us help you help others so this doesn't happen to anyone else.
Yeah, we didn't see a single snap from Justin Fields. And talking to Kirby Smart after the game, he said, we need to find a way to get Justin Fields more involved. He had a great
one day see himself there when his career ends on the football field. What I tell people, especially in this business and what I've learned, you get into this business thinking it's all about the lights, it's the cameras, it's the, ooh, I'm on TV, ooh, I'm interviewing Nick Saban, I'm interviewing Charles Barkley. But what I've come to find out, it's more than just that. It's the stories that you get to tell. And I feel like I've come across so many wonderful stories and people and been able to tell those stories in such a way that they've had a positive impact on other people's lives. And I think that's so very important to me. He has a story, she has a story, everyone has a story. And I think that vision was once blurred because I was never honest with my own story. And I never saw my story for what it was because I was ashamed of it. I was in denial, and I didn't want to share the truth. I didn't even want to know the truth. I didn't even know the truth because I could not grasp the concept that both of my parents died of drug overdoses. And until I was truthful with that story, it was hard for me to see that there's so much more to life than just, the 9 to 5, going to work every day. And that to me is so powerful and so important. And I think it takes learning the truth and stepping out of that shadow of shame, breaking those shackles off. I was shackled to the shame for so many years, and it was consuming me to the point I was somebody that I didn't want to be because I was so ashamed of that. I was ashamed of what happened to them, and ultimately it was a reflection on me as their child. And so I was ashamed of who I was. But I started to share their story, and finally I had been set free, and I felt like I could finally breathe again.